Purim is coming up very soon, but in order to understand Purim, we need to understand a little bit about the historical background. The Jews, after leaving Egypt, desert for 40 years, we entered Israel about 1270 BCE, and we were there for 440 years. We had Joshua, the elders, Samuel the prophet, Eli, Samson, Devorah, etc., until we had our first king, King Saul, and then King David, and then King Solomon, who built the temple. So that was about 480 years from the time we came out of Egypt, living independently in our land with our leaders, prophets, judges, kings, etc. The temple was built by King Solomon, and that lasts for about 300 or so years until the Assyrians came in and exiled the northern 10 tribes. Temple still existed, but then about 100 years or so after that, the Babylonians invade Israel and destroy the temple, destroy the Beit HaMikdash, and the Jews experienced exile. But keep in mind, this is an exile that did not come after a diaspora, that did not come before we had Israel. This is an exile that came after having lived in the land of Israel independently as a Jewish government, Jewish country, with the temple for 400 years, and the rest of the time 440 years with the tabernacle, the Mishkan, the portable temple. So the Jews had had the experience of independence, of living in Israel for over 800 years, and now we find ourselves in exile in a foreign land in Babylon, modern day Iraq, and Persia, modern day Iran, not that far from Israel, but not in the land of Israel. And it was during that time, that period after the destruction of the temple, when we find ourselves in exile in Babylon and Persia, that the turmoil of what is described in the Scroll of Esther occurs. The Jews are threatened by Haman, who is apparently a descendant of the Amalekites, ancient enemies of the Jewish people, implacable anti-Semites, and through a long series of things that appear to be coincidence, Esther being chosen as the wife of Ahasuerus, Mordechai saving the life of Ahasuerus, the king of Persia, early on in the story, being rewarded a little later, and many, many things, each one in and of themselves not miraculous. In fact, no miracles at all occur in the Scroll of Esther, but the combination of events, the sequence of events, ends up in the Jewish people being saved from annihilation at the hands of Haman and the Persians. And of course, we celebrate it through the festival of Purim. A few features about Purim which are very strange. The name, what is Purim? Purim means lotteries. Pur is a Persian word for a type of a dice. In fact, if you go to the Yale University Library in Connecticut, you can actually find a pur from the time of the Purim story. And it looks like a die covered with Persian script on 6 sides. It was thrown in order to determine, either to determine the luck of something or how something will fall, or as a form of divination. Haman famously threw he threw lottery, dice, in order to determine when he would annihilate the Jews. And we call the festival Purim. Of all things, it seems to be a little strange to call it Purim, the festival of the lotteries. One strange feature. Another strange feature, the Scroll of Esther, the traditional Megillat Esther, written beautifully on parchment, as traditionally done by Jews, the same way we write a Torah scroll, tefillin and mezuzah, on parchment with very beautiful ink in the correct, the letters, traditional letters that are only used for Torah, tefillin and mezuzah in the Scroll of Esther. And yet, one thing that appears in virtually all of our holy books, with only 2 exceptions, is the name of God does not appear in the Scroll of Esther. It does not appear in the Song of Songs, and it does not appear in the Scroll of Esther. So that's a little strange. Here we have a book of prophecy, a book of the Torah, a book depicting an event in which God saved the Jewish people, and yet the name of God does not appear. So it's called lottery, which generally we don't associate with divine intervention. We don't associate intuitively with a miracle. And secondly, the name of God is not mentioned there. And third, the Talmud tells us that after Purim, the Jews re-accepted the Torah and renewed their covenant with God. That's type of interesting. We renewed our covenant with God. It's alluded to in the Scroll of Esther. It says, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. The Jews retained and and accepted. Kimu usually refers to the something which already exists and I'm keeping it in existence. Kiblu, accepting, means to accept something new. So the combination of those two words is a little strange, and the Talmud says they re-accepted what already existed, meaning they re-accepted their covenant with God. So how are we to understand this? So one way of understanding it is this. When the Jews lived in Israel, from the time of the Exodus until the destruction of the temple, we had some constant reminders and constant manifestations of the presence of God. We had prophecy. From the time of the Exodus, Moses, Joshua, Samuel the prophet, we had Isaiah, we had Jeremiah, we had Ezekiel. We had great prophets who were giving us the word of God, who were predicting the future, warning us about events, promising us reward. Amazing people of great spirit, people who really literally channeled the word of God. So we had a manifestation of God's presence amongst us through prophecy. In addition, we had miracles. The temple itself, the sages tell us, miracles occurred in the temple. The menorah burnt way beyond, one of the candles of the menorah burnt way beyond what it should have in terms of the amount of oil, olive oil, fuel put into it. The ark apparently took up no place. I know, very strange, physically impossible, yes. But it was a manifestation of the temple being an interface between the physical and the spiritual worlds, but a place where God's presence could be felt, could be perceived, could be seen. And so we were used to a relationship with God which was open and obvious. We were used to a relationship with God which involved prophecy, God speaking to us, miracles, God intervening, manifestations of the divine presence, manifestations of a different reality, a spiritual reality beyond the physical reality in the temple. So, and the Jews had thought, given that our original covenant with God was done on Mount Sinai, and that was in a state of incredible revelation, that was at a time when revelation means that we could see the manifestation. We can't see God because he doesn't have a physical presence, but we could perceive that he was there. We could perceive that he was communicating with us. He spoke to us directly. That's unbelievable. The Jews thought that the covenant of God and the Jewish people was only applicable in a situation like that, i.e., living in the land of Israel, manifestations of a spiritual world, prophecy, miracles, divine intervention. We thought that's how the covenant was supposed to be. Once we were exiled to Babylon, prophecy was coming to an end. We had left the land of Israel. We're not experiencing open miracles. The temple is destroyed. We don't have that connection to the spiritual world in the same way as we did. The Jews thought it was over. There's a very fascinating midrash in which says that the Jews came to Yechezkel, Ezekiel the prophet, and they said, Rabbi Yechezkel, Rabbi Ezekiel, if a man and a woman divorce, they have no further relationship. It's over. So they said, God, by exiling us from Israel, by destroying the temple, by ending prophecy, by stopping open miracles, by not intervening openly, has declared that the relationship is over. We are divorced. The Jews honestly thought that it was over. And they thought that the covenant only existed in this open manifestation. What Purim showed us was that God's covenant with the Jewish people was still just as strong, just as relevant, and just as applicable, even in a time of absolute concealment. Even in a foreign country, Babylon, Persia, even when you could not see God, even when you felt things were happening by lottery, by random chance, etc., God's covenant was still there. The hidden hand of God was saving the Jewish people. It was through things that looked like coincidence. It was through sequences of events that didn't, each one in and of itself, not miraculous. It was through a lottery. It was but it was all a loaded dice. And that is the idea. Einstein said God doesn't play dice with the universe. We say he does. It's just it's a loaded dice. And that's what Purim teaches us. That's why the Scroll of Esther doesn't have the name of God. It's not open. It's not obvious. It's hidden. The very word Esther also means in Hebrew hidden. And the word Megillah, aside from meaning scroll, also means revelation. It's a revelation, Megillah, in the midst of Hester, of concealment. It's a revelation in the concealment. The name of God is not there, but we know God is there. It appears to be a lottery, a pour, a dice, but we know that it's a loaded dice. That is what the renewal of the covenant actually was. The Jews understood that the covenant and the love of God and the Jewish people was still there even in time of exile. Was still there even when there's no miracles, which are obvious. It was still there even when things appear to be happening by random chance. That is the wonder of Purim. And that is one of the reasons we're supposed to drink a little more than we usually do. For some people, that's a lot, but we won't get into that. But we're supposed to drink a little more than we usually. Why? Even in the state of confusion, even in a somewhat inebriated state, we still recognize that we have a connection to God. Even when there's darkness, confusion, we are, so to speak, drunk, punch drunk from the exile, we nevertheless feel God's presence and his divine providence. And that ultimately is what Purim is about. That's why it is called Purim. That's why the name of God is not there. That's why it's a festival with excess drinking, etc. It's all about the understanding that the covenant is not only when there's open miracles and obvious. Afilu, as the famous song goes, which is a quote from Reb Nachman of Breslov, even in the greatest concealment, within the concealment, we know that God is still there, and our relationship is still just as strong, and our relationship is just as constant. The covenant was not only at Mount Sinai, where it was open revelation. What the Jews saw on Purim was that the covenant is even there in the midst of concealment. So Megillat Esther is the revelation of the concealment. Purim is the time when it looks like a lottery, but it's really divine providence. The festival is a time where, even though we are in a haze and confused and in the exile, we are still just as strong in our connection to God. God is just as strong in his connection to us, and the covenant is still there. Have a wonderful and happy Purim. Enjoy yourselves. I should usually say not too much, but in this case, enjoy yourself too much, and Purim Sameach.